I am just starting the recording. Um, uh, I am joined here today also with our student, Mr. Jashvardhan Tiwari. Jash, introduce
Hello,
yourself.
sir.
Yes, then how you doing?
I'm fine, sir. Actually, we have met before. You
Yes,
had
I
come,
yes, yes.
yes, sir. You had come to Dr. Swami's place for an interview for Suraj, along with Anand, sir.
Yes. So Abhijit, very welcome. Hearty welcome to JGU. This program is going to be hosted in our social media platform. So between us, of course, we need no introduction to you, but for our students. So this is the second edition of Sanyog. Sanyog is an initiative by Jindal Conservative Society and Think India JGU, where we meet our thought leaders and intellectuals and discuss with in topics of interest. Today, of course, we have with us Mr. Abhijit Iyer Mitra. Abhijit is a senior fellow at the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies, and he's also a visiting fellow at Sandia National Laboratories and the Stimson Center. He is a defense economist by training and perhaps the most prolific commentator on defense and foreign policy that we have today. So welcome Abhijit, welcome to our show. The first question that we would like to ask you is that can you give us like the topic we have today is the problem called China. So we are looking at China, we are looking at the problem of China, but we are looking at the problem of China from the Indian perspective, right? So it seems that
Right.
it is a bit like Rashomon. China is a problem for many, but it's a different problem for different people, right? So to begin with, like what is of most important topical interest? So can you give our students a brief outline of the situation at LSE and how it has developed since May? Like especially we would like to know like what is the meaning of the term incursion if the LSE itself is not demarcated, and what is it that is the status quo that we aspire for? So can you tell us? Yeah.
So the first thing we need to understand about the LAC is that unlike the LOC, the line of control, this is a non-determinate line. That is why it was called the line of actual control. I think it was a very stupid designation for one simple reason that even because of its designation, it allowed China to sort of play hopscotch with the lines that existed. But you know, to talk about the present status, I've sort of divided this into several categories. The first thing we need to understand is why is this happening? Okay, and this is where a lot of Indians fall into this trap of the battered wife syndrome. Uh, you know, for victims of domestic abuse, for female victims of domestic abuse, they always get into this whole question, why did my husband beat me? What did I do wrong? It's not that my husband is a nasty character, it's what did I do wrong? It's self-searching. Now, the answer to this is quite weird, because if you did, that is to say, India did something wrong, what did Nepal do wrong right now to be at the receiving end of at least 5 different incursions onto their territory by the Chinese right now? Especially when they have a prime minister who's vitriolically anti-India and very clearly pro-China. Why are they doing this now to Nepal? Especially when they have an official border, there is no border dispute with Nepal as such. So why is it happening there? So again, this is one of those things that we need to stop asking. The problem isn't with us, the problem is with them. Second, we need to understand that China has 17 ongoing border disputes with its neighbors, of which 7 of them are land-based. Now, the thing is that China apologists will tell you that China has sorted out all its border problems except with India and with Bhutan. Wrong again. Because if the border was sorted out with Nepal, why are Chinese troops in Nepal right now? There have been big protests in Kathmandu and other places, which have been completely blanked out by the Indian media, of course. by most media. They're not taking this very seriously. So why is that happening? You actually go into the details of it. There are parts of the, you saw this controversy over Vladivostok on Twitter about 2-3 months back, where the Russian foreign ministry tweeted out something about some celebrations of Vladivostok, and the Chinese went absolutely ballistic. There are still islands on the Yalu and Tumen River between China and North Korea, which are undemarcated and hence disputed. That they don't become hot is a different matter. So, this question is very much like a battered wife syndrome. And then it's matched by the other piece of quackery, which is the think tank industry. Okay, this whole so-called expertise, which is basically, kind of, I'm sorry to use this word, but it's a circle jerk of people who are saying 50 shades of the same damn thing. It's like you go to JNU, there's 50 shades of gray, all pretending to be diversity when they're saying the exact same thing, just in different pitches and different nasal tones. This is what you have in the whole think tank industry. Let me give you an example on Syria. Not one expert sitting in European think tanks, or especially DC-based think tanks, was willing to actually draw out what was happening in Syria clearly. They were all playing to some agenda or the other. They basically wanted America to cooperate with Al-Qaeda and ISIS to remove the government, repeating the same mistake America made in removing Saddam Hussein. Basically remove a Sunni leader and give way to, hand the country over to Iran in a sense. This, of course, was an Iranian prop dictator, but still a minority, keeping back Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and people like that. It was this vacuum that created ISIS and, sort of regurgitated Al-Qaeda in a sense. And all of this was supported by think tanks in DC. It was remarkable that Trump, for example, managed to both contain Iran in Syria, as well as, help in destroying Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and finally also coercing Iran through other means like the killing of General Qasem Soleimani, the head of the IRGC, and things like that. So, there's a whole set of policy options that exists out of this circle jerk called the think tank circle of policy expertise in DC. How does this apply to China? When it comes to think tanks in China, most of them are on the take one way or another. So you have this whole cottage industry within think tanks of rationalizing Chinese actions. One set of arguments we heard was it was because of India's abrogation of 370. They were threatened. They thought it was a claim on Aksai Chin. Well, if that was the case, why did it take so long for the Chinese to do this? They could have done it when 370 happened. I mean, we've seen no increase in infrastructure or anything like that on the Chinese side since that 1 year. So what happened all of a sudden? Then they say it's because India started building infrastructure. Again, India started building infrastructure the moment this government took power for the second time in May 2019. So again, what was the delay out there? Basically, there's no answer to this, right? Also, we then need to ask, why did Doklam happen? Why did the Chinese incursions and occupations of 1998, 2006, 2009, 2010, 2011, and 2014 also happen? 2013 also happened. And again, there are no answers to this. So this is a very, why China did it is a completely inconsequential list. This brings us to the present status. The border today is exactly where it was sometime in May 2013. All right. Has it shifted from where it was in, the line of actual control, not the border, since May 2013? Has it shifted since 1998? Yes, because in 1998, say in Pangong, the line was somewhere at finger 5, but we had to divert troops to fight Kargil, and they came in and built a road all the way to the tip of finger 4. Now, I haven't seen any infrastructure even before that in satellite imagery east of finger 4, that is towards finger 5. Yet everybody claims that, the LAC was somewhere near finger 5. Now, every time you ask for proof, there's absolutely no proof that they're willing to give you. On the other hand, me and certain people have been constantly showing satellite imagery and extrapolating the border based on that, based on historical records of infrastructure. And their only answer is, oh, we used to patrol, we used to patrol. Now, patrols are not control. Patrols are patrols. You patrol because you do not control. If you control, you do not patrol. Okay, that is the basic issue out here. So notice there's also this perfidy with language, shifting goalposts here and there. If you want to get into the details specifically of each and everything, we can do that in the Q&A later. What is the next thing that we're seeing right now with regards to the border? One is there's massive deployments on the Chinese side. There is equally massive deployments on the Indian side. So, well, in terms of sheer force to force ratios, nothing to worry about. The Chinese, however, in the last 2 months, have built up almost 7 bases at an incredibly rapid pace on the Tibet plateau. And that is a kind of pace we simply can't match because they've IKEAized, sort of bases and things like that. So that's happening out there. But what more than what we're seeing is the alarming stuff that I'm hearing come out of Beijing. For about almost a month, slightly more than a month now, I've been hearing that Xi Jinping has told his troops to teach India a lesson. Now, I've been hearing this from almost everybody in Beijing except the Chinese Foreign Ministry. But of course, nobody takes the Chinese Foreign Ministry seriously. Even Xi Jinping doesn't take it seriously, and nobody in Beijing takes their own foreign ministry seriously. So we can conveniently ignore what the foreign minister and the foreign ministry say. But it is to teach India a lesson. Now, certain other observers, very alarmingly, have been hearing a new phrase, a war to end wars. Now, I interpret this as a full-scale war. I certainly hope not, but it is quite the possibility. Now, to this end, I've told you about the sudden spurt of infrastructure on the Chinese side. We're keeping satellite surveillance of stores and supplies and marshalling and equipment being brought into Tibet, equipment being marshaled in Xinjiang or Sichuan to be brought into Tibet at short notice. And well, we're monitoring it. We're not seeing anything right now, so I don't know where this is going to go. The one positive aspect of this is the agreement 2 days back is that we've agreed between the two parties to new protocols. And this is very important because Galwan was fundamentally a set of 40-year-old protocols gone horribly, horribly wrong. That in itself seems to indicate to me it will not turn hot like the LOC. It will remain cold as the LAC. But then we don't know where this teach India a lesson or a war to end wars fits into the entire puzzle. Finally, 2 points. We have to, based on our current deployments, our troops have finally been given permission to shoot if first warning shots and then lethal shots if the Chinese try to cross over. The problem is they also have tanks and self-propelled artillery out there. Now, what if tanks and artillery start moving in? Our troops there have permissions to shoot bullets, but the consequences of destroying a tank with either a tank shell or with an anti-tank guided missile or a shoulder-fired rocket, an RPG, so to say, are quite, it's quite alarming in terms of consequences, in terms of escalation and things like that. So where is our position there? We still don't know. What if they do a sort of non-violent armed takeover in that sense? But what has it achieved so far? 2 things. One is that we, on the 15th of June, we went in to destroy a dam. They were resorting to blocking water. It was partially successful, but they got the message and they released the water within hours after that. So we've created deterrence with regards to water, number 1. Number 2, we've established, even though we didn't start it, we've established the right to build infrastructure because the status quo was China was building all the infrastructure. India was too scared to build infrastructure, so we weren't building infrastructure. Net result is, so far as I see it, tactical victory for India. Deterrence on water, number 1, right to build unlimited infrastructure on our side, number 2. So that is how the situation stands at the moment.
So, Abhijit, So what you just told me just have changed the pattern of questions that I would ask, because I was about to ask you what is your understanding what these objectives are. You have just straight away thrown away two things that are flying around, that it's a riposte to Article 370, and then and you are perhaps more what I understand from what you said is that you believe that this is Mr. Xi's show, Teach India a
Yeah,
Lesson. Teaching India a lesson had a political function for Mao. It's perhaps the same political function that she expects. I think she is the person nearest to Mao in recent times. So his
absolutely.
brain also works like Mao Zedong. And what you said is correct, exactly right. The LSE, the very terminology is Chinese. I believe it was first used by Zhou Enlai, and then it become our language as well. We have also started calling the eastern sector as the chicken snack ourselves. So that's a
Mm.
brilliant Stockholm syndrome on part of India.
Yep.
So only question from what you are saying, what I understand is that this is not going to become hot like LOC, but then again, if it is now at the point of entrenchment, then won't it sort of tie our hands in the other sectors, because you will have to keep a large number of forces there, ground forces there, and they have the force multipliers with them. I mean, they have the IT, they have the air force, and we are working in difficult terrain with less infrastructure. I mean, less
Yeah.
developed infrastructure as of now, and our portions are also emptier. So what would that have an effect on the other sectors? I mean, is it going to be a permanent stone, permanent mill or on our neck now? The LSE, the Ladakh LSE, basically.
So it probably is. Look, there's a lot of historical baggage that we're paying for right now, in a sense. But then, the issue is it historical baggage of our own making? Because, we can go and self-flagellate over history. But what Chinese behavior is teaching us is that they would have behaved like this irrespective of what it was. So this becomes quite problematic in terms of projecting it forwards. I think with Xi Jinping, there are so many things about him. I mean, to put this in sort of a geopolitical context, we need to remember the era in which he grew up was very much that post-colonial era. There's certain institutional drivers. It's not just Xi Jinping, but it's also Chinese institutions that are sort of driving this policy, or economic imperatives driving this policy. One is the way Chinese bureaucrats or the people in power, the Politburo, are educated. They still come from this very colonial mindset. It was guised under the talk of anti-colonialism, but it was fundamentally colonial. So, for example, the USSR created the Warsaw Pact, which they claimed was an anti-colonial alliance. But for all, I mean, who actually believed the fact that Poland, East Germany, Czechoslovakia weren't actually Soviet colonies? I mean, they were Soviet colonies. It was extractive. And remember, that era is the kind of education that Xi Jinping and co have gotten, number one. Number two, remember, China today is at that middle income, heavy manufacturing. We haven't moved to services yet. It's that heavy manufacturing. Building is somehow considered in the services, but I count building as manufacturing because it's still, construction and things like that. And when you're at both a middle income level and still industrializing, it is cheaper for you to adopt a mercantilist model and go occupy a country, because the cost of losing your troops and men is still lower than paying a slightly higher capital to that country to start exporting to, right? So the rationale of why France, Britain, Spain, Portugal granted their colonies independence doesn't really apply to China. They're still in that industrial stage where colonization makes sense. So this is a very, very important factor that we don't look at, that needs to be examined more. Third is they have way too much surplus money. So some of the things that Xi Jinping is doing is he's got, like you said, he's got more power than any previous leader had, possibly even more than Deng Xiaoping, similar to Mao Zedong. He's cutting off all the avenues of dissent within the system. And that's very, very problematic because nobody is willing to tell the emperor that he's naked. And nobody is willing to tell him that all his surplus money projects like CPEC or BOR, they're all as economically ruinous without any cost-benefit analysis as Khrushchev and Brezhnev took the Soviet economy. So in that sense, one of the lessons the Chinese Communist Party is taught is to never behave like Khrushchev and Brezhnev. And yet what Xi Jinping is doing is behaving exactly like Khrushchev and Brezhnev. He's just doing it in a different way. But it's the same Khrushchev-Brezhnev this thing. So, you know, it's a combination of so many factors out there.
Okay, so I mean, now it seems to me that these are very structural factors, and this cannot be resolved through talks. And
Absolutely.
I mean, what can the talks achieve? Maybe temporary peace for next 2 years, maybe. But I actually wanted to ask you this question, like now Indians tend to think in silos. Now that there is, and it's a very reactive thinking. Now that the Chinese are in the eastern Ladakh, we think, oh, okay, Ladakh. But actually, they have built up their forces all along the border. I mean, there has been media reports that they have built up large forces near Bhutan. They have brought the T-15 tanks. Then 2017, if you remember, there was a long-lasting standoff at Doklam. In fact, Doklam is perhaps strategically more important than this Pagong Lake because Doklam oversees that highway, the northeastern highway. And they have now laid claims to 4/5 of Bhutan. They are now encroaching into Nepal. So, I mean, it seems that a war is simply an inevitability. So suppose a war comes. How do you think it's going to pan out? Like what kind of war? Is it going to be like a hold-scarred, old-fashioned thing which can escalate into a nuclear war? Do you think it's just going to be one of those India-Pakistan border things? And why do you think? What do you think would be the role of U.S. and Pakistan? We are already expecting Pakistan to join in, and Pakistan is supposed to be the secondary front. I don't know what it means in military terms. So, what do you think? How will our war look like?
So here's the thing. From what we're seeing right now of deployments in and around Tibet, I'm seeing if a war breaks out, God forbid it will not, but it could, because you never know with the Chinese, they're highly unpredictable. You're looking at classic ground engagement and classic air engagement. And with the air engagements, remember, we have a certain advantage, which is we take off from the Indo-Gangetic plains mostly, except Leh Air Base. Most of our bases are easy to take off in. They have to take off at between 11 to 14,000 feet, which is extremely difficult conditions to take off in. Now, to put this in a human context, a plane, think of a plane as a human being. One of the reasons Ethiopian marathon runners do so well in the Olympics is because they train in the Ethiopian highlands, which is 10,000 feet high. And so when they actually perform in the Olympics, they're so acclimatized to low oxygen that when they get a high oxygen environment 10,000 feet below, they're able to perform really, really well. This is exactly, I mean, this isn't an exaggeration. A plane's engine behaves in that exact same way. When you take a person, the altitude sickness you suffer when you land in Leh, that is the exact, I mean, similar, because it is still an air breathing engine. See, it's air coming in, heat being generated just like your body with food, and the exhaust coming out in energy, basically energy, this thing. It's the exact same psychology. So we have a certain fundamental operating advantage out there. The problem is with any country, it doesn't matter how well you fight the war, ultimately industry is going to win out. And you want the clearest examples of this, it is the South, the American South during the Civil War. Great generals, lots of initial victories, but ultimately because the North had all the industrial power, despite incompetence at the beginning, they just thrashed the living daylights out of the South. Same with Nazi Germany. It didn't matter how many brilliant engineers, brilliant designers. You look at Germany, every flying wing form today, every ballistic missile today owes its origin to Nazi Germany in one way or another. And in spite of that, they weren't able to win the war because USSR plus UK plus USA combined was like 6, 7, 10 times the size of the German economy. It was ultimately just going to crush. There's no, comparison out there. So that is inevitable. Is it going to actually get to that stage? Can it actually escalate to a full-fledged war? Can it go past 2-3 weeks without the UN intervening? What will America do? Will America send 4 or 5 battle carrier groups into the South China Sea or the East China Sea or the Japan Sea just to threaten China to move forces away? Like they tried to do with us in the 71 war. They sent the Enterprise carrier group into the Bay of Bengal to sort of threaten us so that we'll have to confront them and move away from Bengal, from East Pakistan in those days. So these things are so hard to predict. You know, there's such a complex matrix. The most unpredictable thing is the Chinese leadership. We don't know. We can't extrapolate sane behavior to them because our definition of sane and their definition of sane are just completely different.
No, but I mean, this cross looking into the situation, like what I would try to point your attention towards that we do have a logistic support agreement with US. I mean, the enabling devices are ready. In fact, I believe the logistic support agreement, actually this was signed later after Modi 1 came to power. So like the US can, I mean, they have been given the legal authority to come into the conflict. But I believe even in 1962 conflict, Nehru had asked for American fighter squadrons, which didn't come about or didn't happen. But it also seems to me it's about a question of how long India can carry on and the determination of the Indian leadership. In 62, it was our leadership which just buckled down. I mean, there's so many things we could have done in 62 which we did not do. But one question I wish to specifically ask you, I mean, suppose we are again back into a UPA-like structure where there's no cohesion and, all this mishmash people are in power. So it's also a question of how far we would be willing to fight. But also, let's look into Pakistan. I mean, what exactly can Pakistan bring to the table? How far can Pakistan assist them? And how far can their intervention be sort of determinative?
Right. Now, see, in 62, remember, China did not have this economic edge over us. They were reeling from communist mismanagement. There were massive famines, people dying all across. In spite of that, in some cases, they were actually poorer than us, and they still managed to thrash us. You're not seeing much of a change in government stance today. 20 of our troops were killed, and even now we can't call them aggressor. We can't call them the enemy. We're still trying to play kuchiku and chami with them. I don't think that works. So, there's this classic rule of strategic schizophrenia and strategic ambiguity. Strategic ambiguity is when you're clear about your goals, but you're trying to make fools of other people, which is what the French do. Strategic schizophrenia is what India suffers from, which is we don't know who the enemy is, and we make fools of ourselves. And we think we're being very profound, but we're not. So, this is sort of like, that report about Indian engineers, which I think it came out in 2015 or something, which said that 97% of Indian engineers are unemployable. They can't problem solve. And my contention always is that the 97, the problem isn't that 97% are unemployable. The problem is that each one of those 97% think that they're the remaining 3%. Because their parents have told them to believe that they're the next Steve Jobs or Bill Gates or whatever. The problem here is that we are strategically schizophrenic. but we think we are strategically ambiguous. All right, so that is one problem. If China had thrashed us in 62, the economic advantages today are much, much, much greater with China today. Even in terms of a logistics chain. All right, you're basically looking at a situation like the 65 war, where Pakistan's ammunition was about to run out in 1 or 2 days or something like that, right? Which is very dangerous. Now, to answer the second part of your question, that we've signed a logistics agreement with America and things like that. See, this would have worked in World War II, where you had certain similar calibers of guns, similar kinds of rockets and things like that. It was all mechanical. In an electronic age, where your Apple does not talk to his Android, or your Android does not talk to his Apple, it is suddenly coming together at the last minute and trying to build an interface within 2 weeks to get Apple and Android to talk simultaneously. Let me give you an example. Say we need laser guided munitions or something like that. The Americans will give us the paveway bomb, the paveway or the JDAM GPS guided bomb. Now the issue is, none of our planes are actually equipped to take on the JDAM. The JDAM requires a certain software and hardware modification to be adapted to the JDAM, so you can't even use that bomb. If, assuming miracle of miracles that we manage to get it done within a week or so, there are only 3 aircraft in your Air Force that will be able to use that bomb, that the Americans will even let you use that bomb on, which is your 3 NATO compatible aircraft. The Mirage 2000, the Rafale. So Mirage 2000, you've got about 50 or so. The Rafale, of which you've got about 3, and the Jaguar, of which you've got about 100. Now, outside of these 3, none of your other Russian planes will they even allow you to take one of their bombs anywhere close to it. So even with a logistics supply agreement, the fact that you've got such a schizophrenic procurement, half from the east, half from the west, well, more than half from the east and some from the west, you can't capitalize on it. When it gets into America actually getting into a hot war to help you, it becomes a lot worse because the friendly fire situation exacerbates. They are completely, they don't need human contact. They see everything on a computer and it's all interoperable and all of that. In India, we can't even get systems within the same plane or the same ship to talk to each other because you've done this mix match of Android, Apple, Windows, la-di-da-di-da. Okay? Thoda sa intercompatibility hai, but beyond that, it is not intercompatible. So very, very problematic. And if you want to understand how problematic it is, try sending yourself, because everybody has Microsoft Word, try sending yourself a Microsoft Word document from Apple to Windows or Android. And what you'll see is the spaces, they disappear. It's a problem that has been happening for 7 years and they've still not been able to solve it in something as simple as a word processor. Imagine how much more complex it is in terms of military synchronization. The third question you asked me was in regards to Pakistan and what role they play. You know, Pakistan, despite all their protestations that, you know, our friendship with China is higher than the mountains and deeper than the valleys or whatever that nonsense term was, that deeper than the oceans, than the Mariana Trench or whatever it was that Nawaz Sharif said. Pakistan has always been extremely non-aligned. They use their friends to get their goals. They never actually deliver on their promises. And this is one of the reasons that Mohammed bin Salman and Sheikh Nahyan of the UAE have basically thrown Pakistan aside and jumped ship to India, because they realized that Pakistan was never going to give them nuclear weapons to put on their missiles. Pakistan was never going to come defend them if Iran attacked them. Pakistan wasn't even going to allow its troops to be sent, which they saw in Yemen. Pakistan said, we will always protect your interests, la-di-da-di-da. They renamed, what was it called? They renamed it Faisalabad after King Faisal, who got assassinated. I don't know what it was called before that. But when it came to Yemen, they just refused to send troops. So these are accumulated things that the Arabs have now learned, that the Pakistanis aren't worth their word in, worth the paper that their treaties are written on. The Americans, of course, you know the perfidy they played with America and Afghanistan. On one hand, supporting America, on the other hand, supporting Afghanistan. So hunting with the hounds and running with the hares karke, which is what Hillary Clinton said. You can't expect to have cobras in your backyard and then only expect them to bite your neighbors. China is discovering this. In the last 3-4 years, all the internal Chinese journals that we've been reading are truly amazing in the kind of bile they're spewing about Pakistan, because it turns out that Pakistan is going over and above the call of duty trying to sink CPEC. And why are they trying to sink CPEC? Because they feel CPEC is going to bring such a paradigm change in Pakistani society. I think that assessment is wrong, because as we've seen with all Chinese investments, they're extractive. They are not growth oriented. But they believe that this is going to change the nature of feudal Pakistani society. And so that entire Fauji foundation complex, you know, that triangular relationship between landlords, industrialists, and the army, they have been working overtime to scuttle these projects. So even China doubts their sincerity. So, you know, Pakistan will not, we may think that Pakistan will come to. Pakistan absolutely will not come to help China. Not going to happen. Okay. If they do anything, it will be some kind of a tamasha, naam ke vaste diversion. It won't be a serious diversion in any sense of that word.
Okay. So, you know, it's what you just said is actually quite different from the main narrative. I like the interesting idea, and I also believe, I think I have read this in some American think tank also, the need for mass. I mean, the US still believes it has the mass on its side, but it is losing the mass. And it is certainly against India when it's a question of mass and, you know, maybe a 6-month, 1-year long battle. I mean, finally, it's a bigger guy who would win in a contact sports. But this brings us back to India, right? So do you think, I mean, I know that you believe that Indian defense planning has traditionally been dysfunctional. I mean, we can all agree on that. That's not even controversial. I don't believe Indian defense planners believe that Indian defense planning has been anything but a mess. But do you think that there has been a kind of Modi reset to defense planning, which, with reference to doctrines, capabilities, and real capabilities? I mean, not just paper planes and paper missiles generally, and also with reference to China. Do you believe that Modi has made any change?
No, I don't think there's been a Modi reset with this. In fact, what we've seen is that even the pace of procurements has slowed quite a bit. The only real big ticket items you had were the Apaches and Chinooks in the first term and the Rafales. Other than that, we've not really had any big ticket items being purchased. And that's actually a good thing. And I'll tell you why. Because none of the fundamental problems that plague Indian defense, bad bureaucratic management, bad military planning within the military. So it's bad advice. If one is meant to act as a check on the other, they don't. They're actually two negatives that instead of becoming a positive, as is the rule of math, they're two negatives that become a maha negative. So, you know, and there is this constant attempt to redo the last idea in the belief that that is the solution. They're not looking at new solutions. They're not remembering that these same ideas that they're trying now have been tried before and have failed miserably. And there is no accountability. All right. Nobody is being held to account for severe delays, failures, whatnot in defense programs and things like that. The problem is one of misdiagnosis. We're not even asking ourselves the right question. And the biggest problem of that is siloization. So you can never solve defense problems if you look at it purely in terms of defense. You have to look at it in terms of human capital, economics, industrial ability, things like that, which is simply not happening. So am I seeing Modi reset anything? Unfortunately not. Even in terms of foreign policy, you look at this paranoid fear of China. I really don't know how to, I mean, what do you have to do to convince someone that China is your enemy? For the last 70 years, not 70 years, but 40, 50 years, the clinching argument in the MEA has been India cannot become a member of the Security Council, permanent member of the Security Council without China's vote. Now you go and talk to anybody in private in Beijing, if you even bring up India becoming a member of the Security Council, they laugh you out of the room as if you're a nut job. It is only the MEA that seems to believe that China will any form of or way not obstruct, forget obstruct, outright veto India's inclusion into the Security Council. It is simply not happening. And yet this has been the clinching argument for the last 50 years, irrespective, pro, con, whatever. After 62, we still supported China becoming a member of this permanent member of the Security Council over us. Today, it's the same pattern. We're still unwilling to take on China. We're still unwilling to decide which side of the boundary. When was the last time American soldiers killed Indian troops? You know, everybody tells you, oh, you know, in 71, they sent the Enterprise in. Did the Enterprise kill any Indians? No. Yet 20 of your soldiers are dead. I mean, sorry guys, where is the equivalence out here? I'm not seeing it any different. In fact, I'm seeing Modi in a sense as Nehru Part 2.
Okay. That sort of kills our hopes, you know, because finally our politics our politics might have actually run out of ideas. That's what happens in India. So let us just come back to geopolitics. Like India would, let's assume that India would remain what she is, what she always has been, confused and paranoid, and at the same time extremely proud. I mean, it's not that we also want to give in to China. Pakistan has given, put their head down before the Chinese. So that is also one kind of way, the Pakistani way of fighting. You know, you say that, okay, sir, you are great. To see Mahano, but you turn back and then you do something nasty against the back. So we are not China, we are not Pakistan also. We are proud people. We say we are equal, but also we are not willing to take the steps necessary. So that's perhaps is going to remain foreseeable future. I do not know when reason would prevail. So let's leave politics for the time being. Let's come back to geopolitics. So I believe that India's Himalayan woes started once we lost Tibet. So Tibet was a land which was tied to us in history, culture, and religion. We were coward enough and we were foolish enough to lose it. I mean, we just walked out of there. We just gave China a free pass.
Yep.
Now, Tibet, what the news we received in the media, I mean, of course, nobody has more confidential information from China. Tibet right now seems to be a concentration camp, full of labor camps, transplantations, so and so. So do you think, do you think it is desirable for India to more active Tibet policy? Like, do we re-engage with Tibet? And if we do it, what will it look like?
Look, I think having a more active Tibet or Xinjiang policy will ricochet back on us, because if we start interfering in Chinese internal affairs, they start interfering in our internal affairs. I think, you know, our responses need to be measured. Now, what China is doing is they're deteriorating our security in terms of our periphery. And that is what we need to do, specifically with regards to Vietnam, with regards to Taiwan, with regards to the Quad. You know, you don't even have to do it actively, which is supply weapons to Taiwan. But say you pass a decision that all Indian weapons, weapon systems have to be seamlessly compatible with NATO weapon systems. Even the act of sailing past Taiwan then takes on a completely different tone and tenor. Right now, if there is an American ship and an Indian ship sailing off Taiwan, China is quite convinced that it can confuse one into believing that it is the other, and, you know, play off that confusion, sort of blue on blue killings, as it's called. If you do certain things, and these are low-hanging fruits, they're not even active things. This is where we need to do what China did with, what America did with regards to the USSR. You know, America and USSR shared a border, which was the Bering Straits. in Alaska, basically. Alaska and the Russian Far East, the Kamchatka, further from the Kamchatka. But that was never the hot part of the Cold War. The hot part of the Cold War was always Europe, where America had no direct border. It was always Germany and Austria and co, which, well, not Austria, Austria was neutral, but Germany, which was the front line of defense. So, we need to do this and turn South China Sea into our main this thing and keep our border calm in that sense. So that's just really, really important. I don't think that we're even willing to do that. Because look, that requires serious out-of-the-box thinking. I don't see any of that happening, because when your entire terms of reference are this sort of circle jerk of think tank opinions, people pretending to be profound when they're saying the exact same things that they have for the last 50 years, you're not going to go very far. But this brings us to the second point. I think you brought it up more as an auxiliary point, which was Indian confusion. The root of Indian confusion, I find, is that very frequently Indian conservatives aren't able to articulate what is happening. And when they say there is a change in the idea of India, what the left says, I think that is in fact happening, and we should own it, because see, India is reinventing itself. India is no longer willing to see its identity as the single point from a freedom struggle led by the Congress party against one colonial power. India wants to see a much longer civilizational continuity going back thousands of years. So if a nation state is an imagined identity, it is shifting away from the identity that the Congress shoved down our throats into a much older identity. Now, the problem is when the nation itself is reinventing itself, your bureaucrats in your institutions are not. They are essentially trained, and they continue to be trained in the thought of the idea of India as born in resistance by the Congress, created by the Congress, forged by the Congress against the British in 1947. That is very problematic, because now you have a people and a population whose collective thinking is changing, but the institutions are all stuck at that same place. And the lack of intellect or articulation within the BJP or the Indian right is basically allowing these people to stay here. Now, you can support a bureaucracy, but you have to break the bureaucracy's mindset with regards to what India is, and that is not being done. That is the real danger. See, that is where the confusion is coming from. And that is a very, very dangerous confusion, because it is a deep systemic confusion that threatens to tear apart. What you're looking at effectively is the, even though it hasn't been a clash, it is a fundamental disagreement of legislature with the executive. Even though we're trying to paper it over with the same sort of lingo and jargon and nuances of old. The second problem with all of this is when we were a poor country, because, you remember this, in the 50s and 60s, everybody used to say, oh, India is going to break up. There's no way the country can survive. It's such a dirt poor country. It's a failed state. They're all half naked fakirs and whatever, snake charmers and blah, 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 blah. You had to oversell yourself. You had to present yourself as the exotic in order to get some attention. And that worked fine when you were playing the underdog. The problem today is India has sold itself as this great economic superpower and la-di-da-di-da, but your enforcement deficit and your inability to deliver is the same as it was when in the 50s and the 60s. So this is why you have India fatigue setting in DC saying, well, you were claiming the same things when you were dirt poor in the 50s and 60s. But now you're making the exact same decisions when you're much richer and you claim to be much richer and you claim to be much stronger in the 2010s and 2020s. So there is also this thing that on one hand, there is this sort of centripetal force separating things in India between institutions, legislature and executive. And on the other, you're in this process, your inability to articulate and all of that, you're also losing the global narrative. which is very, very dangerous. You're losing friends. You're not losing friends, but there's a huge amount of fatigue. There is this belief that India says one thing and does quite
Okay, so basically you are saying that India is still in her mind in that scarcity mode. India is not seeing itself as a security provider, and India is not really taking any concrete steps. And this is an institutional problem. It's in the hearts of the defense planners, it's in the heart of the generals, maybe. I mean, the narrative of the country is changing, but it is changing from grassroots. It hasn't really reached the Luton's bungalow zone as well. And it has not permeated the executive as such. I'll come back to this question of India being a security provider and how India sees itself. But let's just take from what you just said that if there has to be a conflict, keep it far from your borders. And a good place to keep the conflict would be in East Asia. So this brings us to the Quad. So do you think this Quad idea can work? I like speaking for myself, what I see is a fundamental disagreement between US and India and exactly how to deal with China. I think US has the classic military understanding of China that China is a continental power. Inside Asia, it has this inner lines of communication. So there's no real problem trying to dislodge them from there. The only place you can create help for them is in the south, because this is where the oil passes and this is where you have a reasonable navy and you can create a trouble, and hence the Quad. But we also have the Himalayan borders, and can we really also give up on Asia? I mean, just concede it. So there are two views on what Chinese problem is. So if that is the case, how will you work with US and how will the Quad idea itself will work?
So see, the Quad is useful if you are willing to make certain strategic choices. If you are not willing to make those choices, then the Quad is basically going nowhere. And let me give you an example of this. Japan knows who its enemy is. Australia knows who its enemy is. America knows who its enemy is. Okay, and all three of them agree that the enemy is China. They never state it openly, but they have absolutely no confusion in their heads that enemy number one is China. If you remember Kevin Rudd, when he became prime minister, and this is a betrayal that still rankles in Delhi, he went to Beijing and he announced in Beijing that Australia was pulling out of the Malabar exercises. And he did this to appease China. And within about 6-7 months, he realized the folly of it. And this was the most pro-Chinese prime minister Australia ever had. He realized the folly of it and he decided to start backpedaling, but by that time the damage had been done. Japan has never made that faux pas and America has never made that faux pas. And now if you look at the Australian stance, Australia is much, much more hardline on China than India is for that matter, right? Now, these three countries, they have completely interconnected economies. They are extremely high human development economies, similar propensity to consume, similar thought patterns seamlessly. Their militaries are absolutely seamlessly intercompatible because they keep training with each other. And they buy the exact same equipment, or when they buy equipment, it's all designed to work around each other. In India, we have none of this. So first of all, how do you make the Quad work when you can't even decide who your enemy is? When you still behave in a sort of petulant fashion, you don't know what an alliance is, you're unwilling to commit to one kind of communication protocol, one kind of equipment source. And it doesn't have to be America. You can buy from Sweden, you can buy from France, you can buy from Italy, Germany, whatever, Japan, whatever, and still be NATO compatible. You're still not willing to do it. So, Quad is a complete non-starter. It's not going anywhere at all. Let's be absolutely clear about this. It is just a waste of time. It is a photo opportunity at best, nothing more than that. Now, it would have been useful had you used it as a diversion to take China away from the border. Create a massive, massive naval blockade of China, or just start sinking, like what the Germans did in terms of trying to blockade Britain during the war, sinking all the shipping and all of that. Bad analogy because it didn't go too well for the Germans, but let's assume that we are more successful at the Germans, and 4 countries doing it against one would fundamentally be much more successful. That isn't, we're not even thinking in those thought patterns. Our thought patterns are so crude, they're so primitive, they're so basic. It's this sort of petulant opposition to everything without having an idea about anything, right? So I don't see any future for the Quad. I don't see, unfortunately, we are perpetually doomed to have the Himalayan battleground around our necks. One good thing I will tell you though is there is a lot of sign that we're shifting away from ground centrism to air centrism. And that's a very important shift, and I'll tell you why. When you're a general on the ground, Chinese infrastructure is a danger to you, and you don't want to build roads because you don't want to give them an invasion highway, and their infrastructure is enabling them to invade you. When you are an air planner, their infrastructure is an absolute joy for you, because you no longer have to spend time looking for individual bunkers of infantry hiding in the hills. You have these big air bases. You have targets given to you saying, it's like, in those cartoon comics, Tom and Jerry, how Jerry will come and put a target on Tom's back saying, this is the target, hit me or kick me or shoot me here. It's basically like that, this thing. So one of the problems America faced when it invaded Afghanistan was because it had been completely destroyed. There were no targets to bomb. So from an air planning perspective, I think we're getting better. The problem, like I said, is if you get your supplies by air for air warfare from the West, you've got only about 150 or so aircraft capable of benefiting from it, as opposed to over 1,000 aircraft on the Chinese side.
So since you brought up the question of air power, like this also flows back to our inability to have capital assets for our forces. Like this 2-front doctrine wants 42 squadrons. I believe we have 39, and that also not full 39 squadrons, and maybe 35 or something which are in functional order. I'm not sure if this LCA is capable of hosting the American bombs. I mean, they may not be. I am not really an engineer, so not in a position to know. But I will come back to this question, like India's willingness, India's defense policy, what India should do. But let's also turn towards the West. As things stands today, China is integrally integrated in their supply chains. So basically, without China, the West sits down. If they have to confront China, then they will have to effectively decouple their economies. Do you see this decoupling happening? And do you even believe that that the US is not that US of Reagan, or not the US of, certainly not the US of Eisenhower? This is a fractured US where people cancel each other on what they said on Twitter. So do you believe that country even has the political will to take on a monster like this? What do you think?
Yeah, so there are many different aspects to this. See, on one hand, you could argue that the political will in America has gone because of the war between the wokes and the conservatives in America. And, like social media tends to polarize debates extremely. There's nothing you can do about that. It happens in every country. The issue here is that actually going to prevent America from taking certain decisions? And I'd say if you go by Trump's record so far, despite the massive alleged divisions under his rule, he has been much more decisive than the last 3 presidents combined were on China. All right. Bush did something, but Obama and Clinton were complete sellouts. Bush Sr. was also, in a sense, a sellout in that sense. And Trump has done more to take on China than all those 4 presidents, 2 Bushes, 1 Clinton, and 1 Obama, all put together. So does it actually affect empirically speaking, it depends on the man in charge rather than the division in society. Okay, on if they're willing to take on the same thing. You could have a Republican president who falls in this think tanks are everything trap. You know, this sort of need for self-validation in other people's eyes, and make all the same mistakes that Obama or Clinton did, or George Bush did for that matter. Because, you know, George Bush was also considered an insider, which is why his brother never managed to win the primaries, got kicked out at an early stage, and that's why Trump won the Republican primaries in 2016. So, you know, that thing that America will not be able to take on China because of differences, I would disagree with. But when it comes to decoupling, you know, decoupling isn't going to happen by intention. It is going to happen by natural, not accident, but by natural growth of additive or 3D manufacturing. Because see, what is going to happen is the more 3D manufacturing becomes mainstream, it is the easiest, the lowest value product, say tube lights, light bulbs, toilet paper, things like that, that are going to get 3D manufactured. Which means China's entire industry of low cost is going to get wiped out. Because ultimately, no matter how little Chinese labor gets paid, and now Chinese labor actually gets paid a lot more than it used to get in 1989, 1990 and all of that, a machine, they are never going to be able to compete with a machine producing the same thing. So additive manufacture will first gobble up all of China's low-income jobs. Unfortunately, that will affect India even more because we are less developed than the Chinese are in terms of manufacturing. But that's a different matter. I'm not going to get into that. The solution for China then is to transition into the from the middle income trap into the high income trap, which starts at about what, 12.5 to 13,000 US dollars per capita, after which your growth becomes geometric. Now, the problem with that is you can do that if you look at the stages of the Industrial Revolution. The manufacturing revolution, because it is so disruptive, required a strong state. If you want to move to the information age and transition into that services-based paradigm and all of that, the state needs to take a back seat. Otherwise, it does not work. This is the reason that in the 80s, when the digital and information revolution started, the 80s and the 90s, that a whole host of American allies became democratic. It wasn't because of the goodness of their heart or that they were all ruled by these benevolent military dictators. It was because the economics dictated it. Isn't it curious that it is exactly when the digital information revolution starts that South Korea, Taiwan, you know, to some extent Singapore, but Spain, Greece, Turkey, all these countries become democracies, right? On the other hand, remember, till 1979, South Korea was the failed state. North Korea was considered the success story. North Korea had the second highest per capita income in Asia after Japan. And yet, because North Korea's leadership did not want to give up control, it couldn't transition to the information age. And today, it is a de-industrialized state which has the lowest per capita income on earth. So China's leadership is simply not willing to give up control, number one, so they can never transition to a high income economy, number one. Number two, the regime of information denial that is happening to China, Chinese students being excluded from all critical subjects, critical science subjects and things like that in the West, is going to keep picking up. The sort of information denial regime is going to get worse and worse and worse. So its ability to interface with the global economy is simply going to go away. There is no way they can transition. So it will, the decoupling will happen, but the trajectory, I believe, is going to be from 3D printing and additives.
So basically, decoupling would be,
and it will actually make China more bellicose, I'm afraid. Because as we see market share going away, you remember China at one point, North Korea was the same neighbor, China was the crazy neighbor. Under Mao Zedong, China was the crazy one, remember? So what you're going to see is China is going to go down the North Korea way, which is the becoming crazy all over again.
So what you are saying is decoupling would occur, but not as a political choice, but as a technological compulsion. So that's a very intriguing idea, Abhijit. I mean, we can have a whole interview just based on that. But coming back to decoupling, strategic choices, and what, do you think that the decoupling, when it happens, I mean, there would be some point of time where decoupling would force actually India to make a choice. Like at some point of time, it will be A or it will be B. It won't be okay A, B, or other. There won't be any other. And if you look into Make in India or all other Modi's flagship schemes, it seems to me that they depend disproportionately upon participation by this US, Japanese, and Western corporations to bring technology and investment. If that happens, I mean, automatically our course is set. I mean, nobody can stop it then. I mean, politicians would lose the power. Do you think that can happen?
Yeah. So I've got to go, like I've only got 2 minutes left, but quickly to answer that question, no. And I'll tell you why, because Indian politics has never been linked to accountability. If you look at Nehru, he always managed to continually screw up the economy and still keep winning elections with big margin after big margin after big margin. Indira Gandhi, same thing. It didn't matter how many balance of payments crises we went through, it just didn't matter. They'd still vote for you. I think what we're seeing with Modi is one more of those episodes where we've got a giant leader with such a huge, people have so much faith in him that there is a complete divorcing of electoral success with accountability and performance. And as long as that happens, unless the Indian electorate is willing to hold its leadership to account, rather than vote on their charisma and promises, that decoupling is simply not going to happen. That schizophrenia is simply not going to end. I do not see it ending. I actually see us waddling along the same way.
Okay, Abhijit, thank you so much. I mean, I had more questions, but I suppose we can have more interviews in the future. I believe
Absolutely.
you have some work to do. I'm so sorry for this disruption. You see how highly freedom of speech is held on campuses. This would give you some idea. Okay. But thank you so much, Abhijit. I mean, I am really enlightened. I have talked to many security experts before, but your points are really unique in a sense. I think the renaissance that is going on in our cultural and our political spheres now also needs to be reflected in our strategic thinking, because our strategic thinking is still stuck in those same Newton's zone think tanks, and that needs to change. Thank you so much, Abhijit. Thank you
Thank you
for
so much,
coming us.
Abhijit. Thank you
I
so
look
much.
forward to continuous communication with you. Okay. Thank you for coming
Absolutely.
today. Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.